السلام عليكم.
السلام ورحمة الله.
ما شاء الله. Holy crap! Oh no!
This has never happened in my lifetime.
It's coming this way, fast! Let's get out of here.
Bonjour, en ce moment, il y a beaucoup d'incendies sur la planète.
İnsanlar can havliyle eşyalarını evlerinden boşaltıyorlar.
这个水位线已经达到我胸部了啊，太可怕了。
This torrential rain is the biggest on record in Zhengzhou.
Şu denizin hali.
Beğenmedim. Hiç beğenmedim.
Oh man, it's hard to breathe. It's so warm.
I think the zombie apocalypse is gonna start. They made the fucking hurricane, bro.
Воды такая ситуация. Щипит глаза жестко, кругом все задымлено.
So first, I'd like to kick it off to Greg. I am curious to know, as this is your first climate film, did the process of making this, did it challenge any preconceived notions you may have had about climate?
The answer is almost daily, all the way throughout the process. First, I just have to say thank you to everyone who made this possible, to Green Up and to the Climate Hub and Open Forum, and of course to 1111 Foundation. And thank you all for being here and taking your very valuable time out to come see what is the first time we've ever showed this to an audience, and a very nerve-wracking experience for me, that's for sure. So what were the preconceived notions? I think there were a few that really stand out, kind of big picture. One was the science. I think I understood sort of in a basic sense that this is established science, blah, blah, blah. But I think what I didn't understand was the sheer depth and breadth of the scientific knowledge that we have fundamentally about climate change and how far back it goes. I mean, the first paper about the atmospheric effects on climate was literally 200 years ago. So I think in putting together that opening sequence that kind of takes you through the history of climate change and climate science, I think we came to understand in a kind of reassuring way that it's not just that the science is so massive and so deep, but also that it's sort of kind of, once like you boil it down to the fundamental building blocks, it's kind of obvious and not that complicated. And so that was just a reassuring thing, that the foundation of this is so unbelievably solid. I think it was also kind of a challenge to our preconceived notion about the social impact of just people talking about it. I know that that's a big focus for climate communications, is that the most important thing you can do as an individual is just talk about it. And I think, part of the point of the end of having the footage sources come back and kind of give their messages to the world was to just give the audience a sense that there are all these people all over the world who aren't thinking about climate change as advocates or activists necessarily, but are thinking about it. And that to hear them talk about it and what they experienced, I think is sort of a way of saying look around, you may not be hearing it from your community, from other people, but there are people all around you who want to do something and are deeply concerned, and they may just not be comfortable taking that first step. And I think, hopefully seeing all the everyday people all over the world in this film, is a way of sort of nudging people toward the courage it takes to take that first step. And to say, hey, we should do something about this, and maybe somebody else will come with them, and then pretty soon it's population level change. So I think those are two really big things that kind of I wasn't expecting when we started, and I think have come out of it for me.
Thank you so much. I also want to make a note that this film, as you saw, is comprised entirely of footage from 2021. And we thought it was bad then, and look where we are now. So, we often think about how we are in a moment of time where this might be as good as it gets, which is a major bummer. And, if we were to look ahead, it feels really daunting in terms of what we're being dealt with. And I wanted to turn it over to Patricia to sort of speak to, what does our climate future look like? What sort of path are we on if this is the trend?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. And thank you and to the 1111 Foundation for the courage of putting this together, and to you guys for taking on the project, because I think, these are stories from victims of climate change, right? I mean, these are the people who are suffering, and it's not a handful of people here and there, in the developing countries where, we don't care that much. It's actually all over the world, and we're seeing it, and we're seeing it on a daily basis right now. So as you said, life as we live it right now, we're not going to see it probably ever again. And so people, buckle up. I'm originally from Ecuador. I grew up in the mountains, and I had the immense fortune of taking my 13-year-old twin girls to Ecuador this Christmas, where my family is, and climbed the mountains. We went down a crater lake called Quilotoa, and on the way to Quilotoa, you have for those of you who have been in Ecuador, the incredible experience of driving through the Andes and seeing these amazing mountains that have these huge glaciers, that I grew up with. And driving through that same path that I used to take when I was my children's age and seeing the snow nowhere where it was before. My mountains, barren. And what that actually means for people. Indigenous people who live in the Andes and are depending on the water that is coming from these glaciers, and they cannot find it anymore, or they are actually getting all of these mudslides. It's every single time that is raining because the glacier is not holding the water anymore. The mudslides are coming down and destroying their crops, destroying their livestock, destroying their houses. And what does that mean for the people of my country, the people of your countries, the people of this country? I had the immense fortune of being here on Sunday and seeing the mountains, and someone pointed out at me and said, "You see there? That's the last glacier of Switzerland." We're talking about the Alps. Switzerland, the kingdom of the glaciers. And that's the last one. So I think, the word there, courage, is what we need right now. And courage not only to realize that we have a really difficult time ahead, but the courage to change, and to change every day. Because it's everything that we do right now is not going to be enough. We have to start yesterday. We had to start 50 years ago. The science was there, and we haven't been listening. And we are still voting for leaders who don't believe in climate change. We're still making decisions on a daily basis that is helping climate change just accelerate. You heard it from this guy from Brazil. Help us stabilize the situation. We don't have the chance to stop it. Not anymore. We need to take the courage every single day to make a change that is going to help us stabilize the situation for our own sake. Not for the planet. The planet is going to survive without us. Our economy, our daily livelihood, our business, our everything, our water, our livestock, everything that we depend on is absolutely intrinsically connected to the climate. And if we don't take courage, and if we don't take a step forward and change things now, every day, for the next 150 years, we're not going to be able to stabilize the situation.
Thank you so much. I also want to share on the topic of kind of being a Debbie Downer about the climate. Johan Rockström was here. He had to leave early. He wanted to share his thinking on this film, and that is, it feels dire, it seems dire, and that's because it is. But the reality of it is, this is the literal tip of the iceberg in terms of what we're seeing. This is a physical manifestation, and a really low-key one at that, of the, hard fact of our climate is changing, and it's irreversible. So, it's just taking it all with the tone of, this is our climate reality that we're in. But if our despair is rooted in climate change, I think our hope must really be rooted in the solutions. I would love to turn it over to Shyla to speak on, what are some of the solutions and pieces of hope that we can see in our climate future, and also the power of storytelling. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And just to share a quick reaction on the film, I thought it was powerful. It was poignant. I think I loved that it democratized storytelling in a way that gave individuals the ability to reach a broader audience. I loved that there was a unity and a diversity in those stories. Each one was very distinct, but you saw that common thread that really tied them together. And when I think about storytelling, I really think about the importance of it, of us personalizing everyone's climate story. We relate to one another through stories. Facts are really important. We need to understand the logical reasoning of why we should act, but we need to really not just hit people in the head with those facts and with the science, but hit them in the heart. And that's really where storytelling comes in. And for me, and especially for Time, and the reason that Time is prioritizing climate, as we think about the future of our brand and we think about the role of media, especially to make media part of the solution rather than part of the problem, it's about how do you equip people with the sense of agency? Because it can feel so disempowering. It can feel like climate change is consistently something happening to you, not something that you can rise to take action on. And so I think that's a really key, an important part of the solutions. It's not feeling that your only avenue is giving up, or that it's futile. And so a big part of what we try to do is shine a spotlight on individuals that are leading the charge, who are developing solutions, that are innovating, because there's literally something that every single person can do. Whether your talent is design, your talent is communications, whether it's engineering, every one of us has a role to play. And I think for each of us to come into our power, and to rise to the challenge, and to feel like it's our responsibility and our right to rise to the challenge, is where I think storytelling is going to be very critical as we think about this kind of moving into this phase of really seizing that opportunity and removing ourselves from that psychological distance where climate change is something happening to someone else in the distant future. This brings it here, and it brings it now.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, the line that you, Greg, have used in the film is that this was the year climate change came home. It most certainly did. It flooded your yard and your basement and maybe burned down your house. But it really is what we like to call it. We're at a moment of all hands on deck, and there is truly roles for everyone to play in our climate future. If you guys are willing, I'd love to open it up to the audience for a little bit of a Q&A. And we've got a mic that can be passed around, I believe. Does anyone have any questions for either Patricia, Shyla, or Greg? Or me?
Hi, thank you so much for the film. It was amazing. I'm just really interested to know what your plans are next and how you're going to find an audience for the film. What's the distribution plan?
Not a plant, by the way. I just want to point that out. Thank you for asking that question very much. So my co-director, John Siskel, who is also back here, and I want to make sure to point him out and embarrass him in the back row there. So we, along with 1111 and the whole creative team for the film, our hope is to make this the kind of film that people can find in any number of ways. Right now, in the documentary film landscape, nobody knows how to put out a documentary right now. So we are hoping that to find it's an unorthodox film. So to find an unorthodox way to distribute it, and that could be through a streaming service, but it could also be through just online in some other way, or through partnerships, through NGOs, whatever. So that's kind of the first thing, is to figure out how to get a weird film like this out in a way that can reach as many people accidentally as possible. And then we also have, we think the potential for impact in education is pretty limitless with this. So really what we would love to do is sort of have a way of breaking it down into modules so that you can take each of these sequences out and put them in a classroom and say, okay, let's talk about the science behind this event. Let's talk about the social context behind this event. Let's talk about the innovations and solutions to help deal with these kind of events. And that can be a curriculum all over the world. So we think that it has amazing potential. And we also think it has amazing potential to be a kind of politically neutral gathering point for people. So you show the film in any context and it becomes the starting point for a conversation. What can we in this particular community do to then tackle what we're seeing? And ultimately, the real dream is, I mean, because as Megan said, this is not going to go away, to be able to do this almost every year so that over time we create kind of like the 7 Up documentary series for climate change, where you have a record of how climate change itself is changing over the years. So to have this every year for 15 years, the things will be different in 15 years, and that will give us almost like a primary source record for how climate change has changed in that time span. So I will say, freely, we need everybody on board with this. If you'd like to help or support the film in any way, if you have any great ideas for impact for education, we are at a stage where it's all possibility right now for us. So please come see us afterwards and talk to us, because we are very, very eager to find new ways to get the film out in the world.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for putting this together. Thoroughly, well, I wouldn't say enjoyed it, but it hit. Well done. I want to ask, how did you define or sort of set the framework to focus mostly on climate-related events and sort of extreme weather events, and not look necessarily at all the other effects of climate change, biodiversity loss, changes in ocean currents, migratory changes? Yeah.
It's such a good question, because that was a big thing early on in the process. I mean, the first step was figuring out, all right, the structure of the film needs something that people can identify as a narrative. So let's create it as a chronological narrative. So at least from the beginning that we're going through the year. So that was thing number one. And then we wanted to identify what are the phenomena where we can actually find this kind of material that can illustrate it in a powerful way. And I think what we discovered, there are two that I really wanted to include. One was that it was the earliest bloom for cherry blossoms in something like 1,200 years. And that just can't be good. I mean, it's just one of those things that's so weird that that can't be a good sign. But the footage just doesn't sort of lend itself to this approach necessarily. The other one was the bark beetle infestation, just the sort of the devastation of the forest from the bark beetle. And again, bark beetle don't cooperate. They don't operate the cameras. And so that just doesn't work. So I think we realized that we would have to use the things that people actually go out and film. That longitudinal change didn't necessarily work. It had to be kind of immediate and in the moment. And so I think it's a frustration that we can't illustrate the breadth of the changes. But I hope we got enough of the sort of unusual things. I had never heard of sea snot before. So to get sea snot into the film as a sort of indication of what can happen to the oceans and to the water, to get the locust plague in Kenya, at least we were able to get a couple of things that weren't just purely extreme weather. And I feel good that it kind of gives people a grounding that, it's not just storms and fires. It's a little bit of everything. So I hope that that message comes across. But it's a really good question, and I would love to find a way to do this with some of the other more subtle, more longitudinal impacts too.
Yeah, thanks. I thought it was extraordinary, and the subject matter, of course, was almost a new way of storytelling. I mean, I don't know if anyone's quite done this, not that certainly that I know of, but all the TikToks and all. I mean, you have like an expertise now in kind of knitting together all this stuff that's out there now in a really fascinating way. And as you said, it could be the record going forward. It could also be, the positive stories, right? Integrating those. in a way, but it's just, I don't know, I was just really struck by that. That's like an expertise that you now have, like, and you can use it in a bunch of different ways to inspire people. But I just thought it was extraordinary to see everything in real time, you know. And I was struck as reading Ministry for the Future, and it's like, that's fiction, right? This is reality. And it's just when you see the people like suffering from extreme heat, will they be able to breathe, you know? And it's just very telling. So, you know, for my own part, certainly out in California, you know, want to help figure out how to get this to wider audiences.
Thank you. Yeah, it is something where I think there is a weird expertise. I agree, but I think it's something where that kind of storytelling is about as close to a global language as we have now. So I think our hope is that by telling the story that way, it can register with people who would, if you told them this is a climate change film, they would either ignore it or turn it off right away, or they would say, "Yeah, I know what it's going to be about. I know it's there." So I think we see it as like a side doorway to get to people who aren't listening, or who just, you know, think it's important, but it's not a priority. And so hopefully that the universality of it in the vernacular that we speak will be its strength.
Okay, to follow up on the education, because it's happening during the pandemic, right? And it seems that people who were prepared to the pandemic and different occasions, like the shortages of stock and other things, the preparedness, they were dealing better with the impacts of climate change as well. So particularly in US, do you think this kind of presentation will make people getting even more prepared to any type of disasters, but also including, you know, negative effects of that philosophy, like getting more into guns and God knows what else, because there is a security issue behind all of that. And the other question, briefly, to the other panelists about the COP process. I'm coming from the climate negotiations, and some people say the COP is like a big Davos, right? You have much more people, but generally similar audience, and there is one coming in Brazil as well in 2 years. So maybe this is the last COP, which is actually before the real catastrophe. I don't know, COP 30. Thank you.
Do you guys want to tackle the COP?
If you were in Dubai, like many of us, you probably, especially for those of us who work on the nature sector, you know, the COPs feel like one step forward, 3 steps backwards sometimes, partly because the political discussion is so slow. I mean, Greg, you said it, that science has been here for so long. And somehow, I don't know if it's because we're not telling the story properly or what, but the politicians don't hear it, right? They don't have the courage to take those steps and really make changes that are going to impact their political future. I mean, bottom line, they're not going to get elected, or they're not going to be able to preserve their jobs, or I don't know what else. I mean, they're not thinking about the future of their people, definitely. But at the same time, we do have to work with that system, because at the end of the day, and I was just in a panel right before I came here with the governor of Yucatan in Mexico and the head of the climate agency in Brazil. And you have these politicians that are truly trying to make changes, right? And then they have the possibility of making changes in their little spaces. It's how do we bring that political willingness to really make a huge difference right now, and take the courage, really have the courage to make those changes that we need to make as quickly as possible, instead of having these tiny incremental steps forward, baby steps, when we really need these giant leaps to make a difference. Now, as frustrated as one can get with these type of processes, you got to play it. You know, you have to be there. You have to keep drumming the drum and making the noise, because it's the only way that we believe that we're going to make it. And if it's any consolation, and you, Shaila, may have seen this, for us from the conservation community, from the nature conservation community, it's fantastic to see, you know, outside the negotiations, all of what's being talked about. You know, the role of the private sector. The COP in Dubai had, for the first time in the history of the COPs, more than 400 representatives of indigenous peoples. from around the world, local people who are stewards of nature. For the first time, we were giving them the chance to elevate their voices. So there's great things that are happening. It's just that political system is not moving fast enough as we need it.
I think you said it perfectly. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Taking note of time, let's have one more question and then we'll let you guys go have some wine and cheese.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. We brought 30... What?
We just don't want to be photographed. Some of our students don't.
We brought about 30 young students here today, and we're really grateful to be here. We all live and study in the Engadine, one valley further to here, and we are extremely privileged and lucky. We still see glaciers, even though they're retreating. We still have snow, even though it's less. We maybe see some permafrost issues, or we see a landslide or a rock slide, but we are not yet directly suffering from it. And what I perceive is that our students are frustrated. We've heard that word, frustrated, daunted. They feel powerless, but they always hear these topics of climate. And can I ask you, all four of you, do you have any personal input or recommendation how to get that courage out of them, that motivation, even though we have not experienced any of this directly? We see the pictures, but how do we get the students encouraged to not feel powerless, but somehow, even though they can't go to COP yet, or even though they might be the leaders of tomorrow, what can they do today to not feel that feeling anymore?
Wow. Thank you so much for bringing your class here. Can you tell me what age you are?
17, 18.
Oh, I have a 17-year-old. I get the angst. I will just start this off real quick. And I heard a thought on a panel earlier today where the blood, sweat, and tears that you put in and the stress and the worry that you put in for something small on climate is the same that you put in for something large on climate. So to kind of reframe your perspective and understand that it may feel daunting, but any one singular action can get you going. And so just to understand that you won't be, it's not all for naught, and that your efforts will be very much in the longer you work on it. And forgive me, jet lag is hitting in. But just to say that, do not be discouraged. It feels very daunting, but understand that your efforts are worthwhile. So.
Yeah, and I think that we're not at a point of no return. I think that
Absolutely,
there is still so much that can and needs to be done. And from here on out, every single day, every single year is going to be the most important of our lives. And you have the opportunity to be the generation that actually gets to solve this and gets to reimagine and redefine the future. So I think that, there's really a tremendous opportunity there, because we need all of your talent. We need you to unleash your creativity, your skills, to build community, to collaborate with one another, to mentor those older than you, so that we can all be better stewards of this planet.
And I'll just add one more thing. We have all of these climate solutions that are ready to be deployed. There's a workforce gap. So I'm looking at you guys as, filling that pipeline for climate activists and climate workers for the future. So it's a real opportunity for you.
I think I said I have 13-year-old twin girls, and I can completely relate to what you are saying. But at the same time, I have the privilege of working in a space where I can see nature. When you give it a chance, it actually comes back and it helps us. So I was in a panel of mangroves right now, and the minute that you actually give nature a chance, and I used to work with birds before, and I can see the impacts on migration, for example, but the minute that you start restoring nature and you start putting that creativity that Shaila was talking about into really restoring our systems, then we start seeing changes that can help us. So when my girls start getting into that angst position, I said, look what we have done. Look what we have done in these little places. Yes, it's not enough, and we have to do more of that faster at a greater scale, but it can be done. So I think it is an important element to remember that the planet and nature is an incredibly generous system. The minute that you give it a chance, it actually comes back and it helps us. So it's just having the courage, taking the step of really giving it a chance.
That's amazing. I totally 100% agree with everything. And I would also say, so I was going to wear my lucky socks today, which are a gift from my niece who is 19. And they say it's a pair of socks that show a pair of socks just sitting on the couch, and it says worst gift ever. And I sort of feel like that's what climate change is for you guys. This is the worst gift ever. And the thing that always amazes me is how when I see young people who are activists and advocates and the work that they do, I'm like, oh my God, they're just right. And to just and that essentially the people who screwed this up, the old people like us, we're not anymore. So my thing that I would always encourage for young people is just be uncompromising, be jerks. Even if we say, oh, you're uncompromising and jerks, know that you guys are right and that you guys are the ones who are going to make the change, because it's sort of, we're too caught up in the system as it exists now to be as uncompromising and as insistent as you can be. So that's all I would say, was just, feel free to be uncompromising, because that's the only way you're going to push the boulder as far as it needs to be pushed. And also, if you like the film, come up and talk to us about it, because we really, really want to hear. If you didn't like the film, also come up and talk to us, because we really want to hear why, because we're concerned about your concern. And we don't want this to be a thing that compounds anxiety. We want this to be a thing that is a way of expressing this issue in a way that is familiar and then can be shared. But if it's not that, we need to know. So I encourage you to also be jerks and insistent when you talk to me. So.
Thank you so much, Greg. And thank you so much, Patricia and Shyla. We really appreciate your participation in this panel. You guys, thank you. If we could give you one call to action, that is, whatever you're doing on climate, double down. And we're grateful for your time. Thank you so much.